ตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Blessings to you all. It's natural when we practice the Dhamma, whether it's dana, the practice of generosity, helping others, practice of sila, learning to restrain our conduct, body and speech, so we're not harming ourselves or others, or practicing bhavana, mental cultivation, that we face obstacles, difficulties. Just being born as a human being, already we're going to face problems. And then when we come to practice the Dhamma, sometimes it seems like we're increasing our problems, increasing our stress, increasing the difficulties of our life. This is what we call the suffering you go through for the end of suffering. Practicing the Dhamma is not always easy, straightforward, because we've accumulated so much in the way of karma, identification with this body, mind, our thoughts, views, opinions, beliefs, the things of the world, people, family, possessions, property, and so on. We've accumulated so much, and that's the very cause of our suffering. So when we come to face that, look into that, and start to abandon the causes of suffering, well, you get a reaction from your own mind, from your own mental defilements, rooted in greed, anger, delusion, and what we often just call that sense of self. So anyone who's practiced the Dhamma, man, woman, young, old, monk, nun, layman, laywoman, will have encountered this frustration and the difficulties of the practice, training a human mind to overcome ignorance of the truth, learning to observe, pay attention to see the truth is an incredibly frustrating experience. So sometimes, especially in the beginning, we equate the frustration and the difficulty with suffering that we are creating out of the practice, or even blame the practice for this suffering. Blame the teachings, the teacher, the method. And we might even think, oh, before I practiced Dhamma it was easier, life was much easier, I just went along with things, went along with my desires, my thoughts, went along without thinking too much about life, what you might say in blissful ignorance. So when you start to change that, you want to change this flow of blissful ignorance, it brings up all kinds of resistance and physical and mental pain, disturbance to the mind, because we're in training. And if you train in anything in life, there will be a certain amount of tiredness and frustration and repetition and difficulty to go through, but nothing more so than the Dhamma, because in the Dhamma we're training this mind for liberation, for the end of suffering, for Nibbana, for enlightenment, which the Buddha pointed out is the highest kind of happiness available to humans. So what is the highest will naturally require a bit of effort and going through a bit of difficulty to get to it. So the Buddha encouraged us sometimes, if we're struggling in our practice, to go back to square one, develop the beginner's mind, go back to reflecting on the Buddha himself. The Buddha was formerly a bodhisattva, a being intent on becoming a Buddha, but travelling through samsara, the cycle of birth and death, over and over again to fulfill that wish, and relying on determination, resolution, and what we call satya and adhitthana. The Buddha recollected that in his past life he was known as a hermit, or Sumedha, who had practiced meditation and already had a very well-developed mind, developed enough to the point where he could make this wish, solemn vow, you could say, to become a Buddha, having met a Buddha, a previous Buddha, Dipankara, the Buddha, and being so inspired out of compassion and wisdom, he made a vow, a resolution to become a Buddha in the future. And when he did meet Dipankara the Buddha on the edge of a village in northern India, many, many lifetimes before, he showed his respect and worship for Dipankara by laying down over a muddy stream to stop Dipankara the Buddha from getting muddy, wet feet and robes, and invited him to step onto his back and over the mud, using his body as a bridge. And they say at that moment he made his vow, his resolution to become a Buddha. And that was 4 asankhayas and 100,000 kalpas ago, a long, long, long time ago. From then on, every lifetime as a bodhisattva, born into different situations, he was holding to that vow, that resolution, and going through every kind of obstacle and difficulty that you can imagine. So when we're facing difficulty in our practice, training a stubborn mind, working with a body that has its limitations, aches and pains, sickness, and then a mind that's stubbornly holds on to its desires, stubborn sense of self, wrong views, wrong beliefs. Well, when we get frustrated dealing with that, we go back to the Buddha and think how much he went through in his life, and we get strength from that. And it's not simply blind faith, say, in a legend, but it's, you could say faith, but also understanding that the Buddha himself trained to the point where he liberated his mind from all his wrong views, wrong understandings, experienced the highest peace, the highest happiness. But not only that, he was able to teach others, which is one of the roles of a Buddha, is to teach others how to do the same, to free their own minds from stress, suffering. And he did that very well. And then others, since the time of the Buddha, his students, monks, nuns, men, women, have practiced right up to the present day. And in each case, each enlightened student of the Buddha is proving that what the Buddha taught is true, and that other human beings can also practice this. It's not beyond us. Even if it does take a lot of effort and energy, it's not beyond us. It's not beyond the capacity of a human being to practice what the Buddha taught. And there have been so many practitioners over the years, in many different circumstances and backgrounds. This is another way we get our confidence, our faith in the path of practice, in the Dhamma, and in the Buddha's enlightenment, and in the Sangha, those who have practiced and realized the truth after the Buddha. It's not just one person, it's many people. And there still are in this world today people who are realizing the truth after the Buddha. So if we call it faith in the Buddha and his teachings, you could say it's an informed faith, pointing to the fact that all human beings have this potential within them, like a seed, but it needs to be nurtured, cultivated into a plant, a tree. And that's where the difficulties and obstacles come up in the course of that practice. Luang Por Chah was our teacher, and we know how much difficulty he went through in training, because out of compassion he was very honest in his teachings about some of the problems he experienced as a junior monk, even as a senior monk teaching others, running a monastery. He shared some of his own insights into his own suffering and how he dealt with it. And even Luang Por Chah's teachers also shared their insights into their own suffering. So you get this by listening to Luang Por Chah, listening to the Dhamma from his teachers, up to Luang Por Man, who was like the grandfather of the modern forest monk tradition in Thailand. You realize everyone goes through similar things, just depending on their own personality and their own karma. You know, the details may change from person to person, but they're very similar experiences of learning to be very resolute in the practice, committed, determined, patient, and applying those teachings that they've gained from the Buddha. Luang Por Man also talked about his past lives, how he'd set his mind in previous life on becoming a Buddha. And for many, many lifetimes he had held to that resolution himself. But unlike Siddhartha Buddha, our Buddha, Luang Por Man, in his final life, this life in the last century, he came to the conclusion it would be a long, long time before he would ever attain Buddhahood and become a Buddha. And the world needs enlightened beings, and needs them now, still does. So he said he gave up that resolution to become a Buddha and sought enlightenment in this very life, the last life he lived, and attained it. Perhaps at that moment when he gave up that resolution, he had enough insight into his own abilities and the practice he'd done so far that he was confident that he could become enlightened. And he gave everything to the practice, he said. One of the things that comes through true dedication to the practice, on every level, dana, sila, bhavana, samadhi, wisdom, insight, one gains all kinds of intuitive knowledge, special knowledge. Sometimes they call it anagata jnana. It's one of the special knowledges that practitioners sometimes gain. It's insight into the future, their own future, the capabilities of what they can achieve in this life, which gives them confidence. So with his special knowledge, he had confidence that he could attain what is difficult to attain and put his heart into his practice. And he also had that same similar knowledge with his students. So when Luang Por Chah went to meet Luang Por Man, one of the things that monks in those days were doing, in Thailand they have two sects of monks, the Dhammayut and the Mahanikai. And they both practice the same Buddhism, use the same scriptures, the same rules of discipline, the same meditation techniques, but through historical, administrative development in Thai Buddhism, two sects emerged over the last couple of hundred years. And Luang Por Chah was in the Mahanikai sect, one of the sects, and Luang Por Man was the Dhammayut sect. So practicing the same way, the same Dhamma, but just administratively at a different organisation that they followed. And many of the Mahanikaya monks, when they met Luang Por Man, they had so much faith in him, they decided to change their lineage, their ordination lineage, and become Dhammayutta monks. But sometimes Luang Por Man, with this vision he had of the future, he would say, no, don't do that. Stay as a Mahanikaya monk, because the other sects also need very good monks to lead them. This is what he did in the case of Luang Por Chah. So Luang Por Chah was practicing the same Dhamma as Luang Por Man, but he just had a different ordination lineage. So when he left Luang Por Man, he went off with that. And it was another display of Luang Por Man's great vision, seeing what would be useful for the greater community of Buddhists in Thailand, and you could say around the world as well, as things have turned out. And some of Luang Por Chah's teachers were the same. Luang Por Tongrat and Luang Por Ginari were teachers of Ajahn Chah. They also went to see Luang Por Man and trained with him, but they didn't change their lineage. They stayed as Mahanikaya monks. So as we practice meditation, wisdom faculty sharpens. As we teach others, help others in different ways, whether even just dana, helping people, giving things, sharing things with people, practicing charity, generosity. In every way, our practice develops special knowledge, wisdom that we can draw in our mind. Sometimes it's quite intuitive, without a lot of thinking and reasoning. One just knows things and it seems to be true or come true. Other times one has to contemplate deeply, and that's part of the practice, is learning to contemplate. But as we face difficulties in the practice, obstacles, problems, our own self-doubt, our own anxieties, our own physical problems, pain, aches and pains, tiredness or illness, our own mental suffering, frustration, trying to deal with our own mind. These kind of insights, intuitions come up as well, where we get a sense that this is the right thing to do, the right way to practice. This is the way that will lead to success. Sometimes it's supported by teachers, which is one reason it's valuable to have good teachers. Kalyana Mitta. Sometimes it's just coming through our own mind, our own insights. But as we practice, our intuitive skills and our wisdom faculty develops at every stage. Even a practice of dana, we become wiser by practicing dana. And it's a very powerful kind of karma when you practice dana. You'll see resistance and obstacles come up to helping others, sharing what we have, giving things away, supporting the religion, and building monasteries, whatever way we practice dana. As we do it, it will bring up resistance in our own mind. It will be tiring, so it can tire us out. It can bring up doubt. Why do I do this? Why do I help people, other people, individuals or groups? What benefit does it really bring me? You can have doubt. But as you do it, at the same time, you also start to see little bits of attachment to the sense of self drop away. And so they have this saying, that when you practice dana, if it hurts, then it's probably good for you in your practice. Because we all like to practice within our comfort zone and not push ourselves much. But if it hurts, that's a sign maybe you really are practicing some true dana, giving a little bit away of that self-attachment that is actually the root cause of our suffering, our delusion. They say people practice dana on 3 levels. There's the level of kind of seeking worldly happiness from the generosity they practice, wanting to have a good reputation maybe in our family or circle of friends or in our local the society, the people who live in the area around us, where we get to be known as someone who is generous. Makes us feel good, maybe brings some good connections, some praise from others, respect, good reputation with others. And it may lead on to certain worldly benefits, and that may be why we're doing it. Then other people, they practice dana that for slightly deeper reasons. Maybe they're not only looking for happiness in this life on the material level, but looking for some spiritual awakening and also thinking of their future lives. And the dana we make brings results back to us. It supports us in this life and in future lives. Maybe it's a cause for a good rebirth. So they're thinking on that level. And then there's those, probably fewer in number, who are practicing their dana for nibbana. And they say, nibbana paccaya hotu. May this be a cause for nibbana. And they offer some kind of dana to sangha, or do an act of charity, or help out somebody who's in difficulty or in need. But it's for the letting go of this attachment to self. So it's done with the real intention of it being a supportive act for nibbana. So even just the practice of dana can be done with different intentions or different levels of intention, and different results come from it. So sometimes maybe that's something to look at in our practice. If we're practicing dana, maybe even regularly practicing dana, and we think we should be experiencing more happiness or gaining more understanding of the practice from this dana we're doing, but it doesn't seem to be happening. We'll go back and look at your intention. Why do I offer dana? Am I expecting something in return? That's an intention you can see in your mind, and sometimes it's there and we notice it, but we're not honest enough, or we're too distracted to recognize it, that we're offering dana but with something, wanting something in return. So dana can lead straight on to the development of wisdom and insight, seeing that sense of self that emerges with dana practice, helping others, practice of giving, sharing, can give us direct insight into the very sense of self that is the cause of attachment and the cause of suffering. As we practice more, and our mindfulness might improve, the ability to develop mindfulness, bring our attention to the present moment. Then the Buddha encouraged us to keep looking, observing, again developing this wisdom faculty based on observing the truth of the way things are. And again, can bring up a lot of frustration and resistance. Like when you practice meditation using a meditation object, such as the breath. You bring your mind to the breath, you determine you're going to sit for a period of time. Of course, all the different thoughts and mental states come up in your mind and you see them straight away. And your mindfulness at first is not quick enough to let anything go or deal with anything with much insight or wisdom. We just have to bear with it. That will, when mindfulness is weak, then we do react often with aversion to our own mind. We're not happy with what we see because our mindfulness and insight not quick enough to let go yet. We're just stuck with our anxiety and worries, or the desire for distraction, desire for different sense objects, or sleepiness, and so on. That's the first thing you encounter. So many people recoil from that. They don't want to face their own state of mind because it's not very inspiring at first. It's coming to see the truth of the way things are. You've got two ways to go then. At that point you can be patient and keep improving the practice of mindfulness, patiently developing that strength of mind, developing the steadiness of mind, the stillness of mind, or you give up. So if you're feel like giving up, just want to give up, it just seems too difficult too much trouble or too painful, whether it's physical pain of the body as you meditate or the pain of looking at your own states of mind. Again, go back to the Buddha. Remind yourself the Buddha went through all of this. Ajahn Mun did, Ajahn Chah, and everyone who's developed skills in the practice of the Buddha's path have had to do this same thing. Looking first at what the problems are, what the nature of the mind is, what the nature of mental defilement is like. Be willing to face that. If you want to get beyond it, you have to look at it first. It's just like if you've got a wound in your body, or you have a cut or a graze or something worse, a real wound that requires stitching or surgery. It looks horrible, exposed flesh, blood. There's pain and there's mess. Most people don't want to look at a wound, an open wound. But if you're going to mend it, sew it up, prevent further infection and so on, you've got to look at that wound in order to treat it. You can't ignore it, otherwise it will get infected or things will get worse. So you have to have that same kind of courage with your mind, to look into the mind, to steady the mind. It's just like the doctor needs a steady hand to do the stitching or the surgery, clean up that wound. Excuse me. You need to have that same steadiness of mind to look at the mind itself, the different mental defilements that come up. The patient effort and the mindfulness to just look and observe, even if they don't look very inviting or they look ugly, unimpressive or confusing, which is how our mind often does appear when we begin meditation. But you see, the more you can steady your mind by bringing up mindfulness and practicing mindfulness, there's a chance to observe what's there with this sense of detachment, coolness, calm. That starts to expose many things, the truth, the actual truth about our mind and the states of mind that inhabit it and come in and out from time to time. But the practice of mindfulness gives us that place of safety, peace, to look, but without getting too involved or caught up into the mental proliferation. At first that's difficult, but if you keep practicing, you start to have some success, where you can see thoughts, moods, memories come up into the mind, but then let them go. Let them be rather than getting caught up into them. And that ability to look and watch without getting caught up in your own mental activity is where the insight comes. And you see thoughts arising, passing away. You see that before you had a thought, that thought didn't exist. After it's passed away, it's gone again. So even if it's a very unpleasant thought, painful thought, one thing is that it's impermanent. And what is impermanent cannot be a solid, substantial self. So we say it's not self. This is where insight starts to arise. And even if one only has a few moments of that, a few glimpses of that, it's a very powerful conditioning force on our mind. It gives us the memory that, I've seen anger or anxiety or fear or greed, desire is impermanent. I've seen it arise and pass away before. And that's where the seeds of wisdom start to develop. So just as with the practice of dana, the practice of meditation is not easy, and it brings up many obstacles and reactions in our mind, but those seeds of insight start to take hold. And we start to know sometimes very quickly. Everyone has the experience when you're meditating, you have all kinds of moods pop into the mind, and suddenly you move from being calm to agitated, confused, worried, distracted, desiring, hating, loving, hating. And it seems to come out of nowhere, but gradually those seeds of insight can develop. And so you're seeing more and more how they come out of ignorance, unawareness, but of themselves they're just impermanent mental states that arise and pass away. And they've arisen, passed away before, and they will arise and pass away again. Why do they arise? Well, that's power of karma, karmic conditioning from the past. We've attached to perceptions and thoughts of anger, of love and attachment and greed, anger, irritation, hatred in the past, and so they'll come up again. But every time we develop mindfulness and insight, we're weakening that conditioning process. The habit is being changed, broken, little by little, so they won't come up so often or so intensely. And that's where the seeds of insight start to become established in the mind, and even if sometimes a very powerful, overwhelming thought comes up, this doesn't last. As they say, it will pass. Or another way one monk talks about it, it's like you're seeing what it's like when there's only one hand clapping rather than two. Like attachment is when you've got two hands clapping together, you get a noise. One hand clapping, it's silent. So let's say you have aversion arise based on some pain as you're sitting meditation. The old you, the past karma, the past sense of self would probably react with aversion, irritation, a desire to get away, seek distraction, or sometimes even fear. This pain is going to cause me damage, hurt me or something. But when mindfulness and insight is coming up, then the sound of one hand is like, there's this feeling of pain, but the mind is not grabbing onto it, attaching to it. So there's no noise. It just is what it is. It's just pain arising, passing away, and the mind knows that with a sense of detached awareness. Or unpleasant memories, you're meditating, and so often you meditate and your mind starts lingering on past aversion, things that have brought you annoyance, anger, disappointment, things you've done and experienced, things people have said and done to you, different unpleasant experiences that are happening in your life, all the stuff that may come with lockdown and COVID and work problems and money problems and so on. When these come up as unpleasant memories, with the presence of mindfulness and insight, there's just the one hand to clap. That's just the object, the memory, the thought, but then it goes away again. If you grab hold of it, you become angry, you become anxious, then that's like two hands clapping together. You get a noise, and the whole thing is continued. The karma is continued, maybe even intensified because you indulge it. But when mindfulness and insight are clear, it's just another thought, another memory that you can let go, even a very painful, unpleasant one. So no noise is made, it's just one hand, no two-hand clap there. And that also translates out into the world, which is where our more extreme suffering comes, the feeling of lack or hunger that leads us to constantly want more things, more experiences of pleasure, more possessions. That's like two hands when you go looking for things, grasping at things, pleasant experiences, whatever it may be in the world, things we buy, pleasant experiences we have, seek after that actually stir our mind up on the inside. You're starting to see the suffering that comes from attaching to pleasure, the inherent or hidden suffering of pleasurable experiences and objects and things. So your mind starts to step back a bit, doesn't want to follow that desire, that wanting all the time. So you may see something or have the desire for some experience, some pleasure come up, but like the one hand, it doesn't grasp hold of it. So there's no new karma being made. You're actually weakening the old karma. You're always seeking that thing you're addicted to or obsessed with or really want. Now seeing that the wanting itself is suffering. The pleasure is suffering, the wanting is suffering. If you were to let go of the wanting, what would it be like? Peaceful. No noise is made, the hand is not grasping at it. Same with aversion. Somebody you don't like, they say things, they do things, and you keep wanting to get back at them, seek revenge, say your bit, get back at them, but now you see the suffering of that kind of negative desire of aversion. So it's like the one hand, there's no longer two hands clapping. They may still even be doing things towards you. Somebody doesn't like you and they say and do things and try and hurt you, annoy you, take advantage of you. But there's only one hand there. If you're not giving in to anger, you're mindful enough, you're restrained enough, you have insight into the suffering of following anger, then it's like the anger drops there and you don't take up the thought, seeking revenge. So the mind goes silent. It's only one hand. If you give in to your anger, it's like the second hand is there now, it claps, and more karma is made. People, when they do practice meditation or practice anything within the Buddhist sort of way of practice, often they're using the excuse of, I've got too much karma, I've made too much bad karma, I'm no good, I don't have the right qualities to practice what the Buddha taught. So their doubts come up again. But really, we have the means to diminish and reduce these karmic habits. And that's the only way to do it, is to actually reset our mind, so that even though the old conditioning comes up, the tendency to grab hold of thoughts of aversion, thoughts of desire, greed, lust, but not hold on to them. They arise and then you let them go rather than taking hold of them and indulging them. And this is where we're developing the most refined mindfulness and insight, seeing that all our mental states are impermanent, not self. It's not trying to say there's nothing there, but it's recognizing their true nature is that they're not a person, they're almost like a mirage, an illusion that can be let go of. And when you let go, what happens? Oh, you get peace. One of the qualities of practicing Dhamma then is that one becomes more used to letting go and finds contentment and happiness in letting go, where formerly one clung on to the desire, the wanting, the sense of self, both the delighting in and the aversion to different experiences. The mind lets go, and it's happy to let go because it knows, again, this intuitive awareness and insight, it knows this is the way to happiness, to peace. When we're deluded, we don't yet see it's worth letting go. We think our real happiness lies in following those desires all the time, getting rid of what we don't like and getting what we want. So you get locked down, and the rules and restrictions about lockdowns and all the difficulties and problems surrounding COVID, or you get the illness itself maybe, the painful feelings and the discomfort of the illness itself. But if we're not mindful, then we tend to go to aversion, don't we? And you just want to squash it, destroy it, get rid of it, kill lockdown, kill coronavirus. That's what's following negative desires like. Or you're seeking distraction to get away from your negative desires, which you're fed up with and bored with or frustrated with, so you seek distraction out of it, so you go to wanting, liking. The mind is forever moving between acceptance and rejection, attraction and aversion, and so on. Never peaceful. But the way of the Buddha is the way of the middle way of knowing experience, knowing the qualities of our mind, this body as they are. Impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self, not to be grasped at as self. We grasp at this body thinking this is going to be good, I'm born, I'm going to be happy with this body, I can run around accumulating pleasant experiences in the world. And there's certainly nothing wrong with having a sense of well-being and appreciating the good things in life, but it's that desire and grasping that we have for the body, the automatic identification with it as a self, is where the real problem of suffering is. So the Buddha encouraged us to look, this body, Once you've been born, you have no choice but to face aging, sickness, death. It's inevitable. That's the suffering hidden within the pleasure. You may have many pleasant experiences in life, but they're all ultimately impermanent and not self, because one day we have to die. Better to know that truth than to reject it or hide it and run away from it. We tend to do that when people talk about death or impermanence. Often other people don't like it. They don't want to hear the truth. They say the one bringing truth is like the bearer of bad news. But the truth is actually liberating, but you have to give it a chance. You have to give your mind a chance to see the truth, know the truth. What we tend to do is run away from truth, distract ourselves with the next thing, the next experience. And so if we're ever running away from the truth, and we even look at the truth as some kind of enemy, so when we do realize things are impermanent, we don't like it at first. We reject the truth. And you have painful feelings. What you could do is establish mindfulness and say, this painful feeling is actually just a painful feeling that arises, passes away. Develop that kind of insight. But what the unenlightened mind tends to do is have a painful feeling and say, I don't want this, and it goes to distraction. Think of the next fantasy, the next imaginary nice thing that we can do and have and be. Or go into aversion and just want to destroy and get rid of everything we don't like. But not peaceful, not mindful, not insightful, not peaceful. But really we could say, okay, this body does bring us pain, but pain is just another experience, arises, passes away. It's not self. So the Buddhist path is like this, developing insight at every level of our practice, letting go of delusions, wrong views, wrong perceptions that cause us suffering, understanding better how to look after the mind, free it from suffering. There's already enough suffering in the world. We don't need to create more. When we're not mindful, we're back into creating suffering. When we're mindful and insight is there, we're reducing suffering from the world. So there's always two directions to go. Are you going in the direction of creating suffering for yourself and others, or you're going in the direction of reducing yours and other people's suffering and ultimately removing the experience of dukkha and suffering from your mind and thereby helping others as well. There's always these two directions to go, and unfortunately the way of creating more suffering is the easier one. That's why we do it. It's easier to follow greed, anger, delusion. It's difficult to follow the way of non-greed, non-anger, non-delusion. The way of letting go is difficult. The way of clinging on is easy, and that's why we suffer. So I'd encourage you not to rush to go the easy way all the time, because you might just unwittingly be increasing your suffering. And give a chance to the harder way, the one of letting go, of being more mindful, of working with your mind. And hopefully that will bring you more peace, more understanding, more happiness. So I wish you well tonight and leave you with these teachings.